This might be a little bit advanced, but I believe you guys can do it. It's interesting in the sense that we're going to be using a debugger tool in Chrome to ascertain whether our variables are local or globally scoped. How cool is this? So let's quickly create something that we can test our variables in. Well, let's start with an HTML document, standard template, and let's start writing our JavaScript. Remember, JavaScript has to be inserted within script tags. And now let's define a variable called age. Let's make that equal 3. And we know this is a string. And we know this is a number. And we would expect this to be a global variable. So let's say a global variable with type number. Now let's create a function. And let's just call it scope for the lack of a better word. And let's create another variable now. But let's make this a string and say it's young. And take a step back. What scope do you think this would have? I hope you said local. Local variable with type string. And now I'm going to get more complicated. Let's create a block. And let's create yet another variable called age. This time let's call it old. And in isolation, what would this if block be? What scope would that be? Yes, it would be a local scope. It would be a local block scope, to be specific. This should be a local block scope variable with type string. And to test it, we can console log age over here. Outside this if statement, outside that block, we can console log age. And outside everything, we can console log age. And remember, to execute a function, we have to call its name, which we've called scope, with brackets. Now, you might be sitting there wondering, how do we know whether our variables are locally or globally scoped? And if it's even locally scoped, how do we know whether it's function scoped or block scoped? Well, one way is to just use your theory, sit down and figure it out. But the other way is to use Google DevTools. But before we get into DevTools, I just want you and I to think about each one individually. The first age on the screen, that I'd expect to be global. We've defined that age outside everything. Then we get to the function. So when we define new age equals young, I would expect that to only be available within the function. And then when we nest another block within that function, that age equals old, I would expect that to be only locally available within that block. Does it kind of make sense? So how do we see this in DevTools? Well, there's another keyword in JavaScript, and that is debugger. When you put that in your code and the interpreter comes across it, it literally pauses the execution of JavaScript, and it defines the variables for you. Let's see it in action. So where do we want to put these? Well, let's say on the first age, the global level, we want the debugger to stop. We want to see what that age is. Then we get into the function, we define age equals young. Let's see at this point what scope that age has. And then when we get into the second nested block, let's do the same thing. All we've got to do now is start the server, and we should be able to see the results in the browser. And we've got a blank screen, and you'd expect a blank screen because we haven't defined any HTML. So it makes sense. What we're interested in now, though, is the JavaScript and those variables. And this time, we're not going to be looking at the console tab. We're going to be looking at the sources tab. So let's go into the sources. And as soon as we refresh, let me just make this a bit wider. As soon as we refresh, I would expect that debugger to kick in. So we refresh the page. And there, we've hit our first debugger. And at this point, we've defined age within the script, which is global. And you can see on the right, that's exactly what's happened. it's got a scope tab, and we can see the scope of our variables. And remember how I said the interpreter executes code from top to bottom? Well, this means that it's going to skip over this function for now because we haven't executed the function. This is only defining the function. And it should hit this console log age expression. Let's see if that happens. And it does. It hits the console.log age expression. And at this point in time, what is age? That's right. It's the global age. It's the number 3. So when we step over this and it executes, and we just tab over to our console tab, there's the number 3. But let's go back to our sources. Let's continue. Now it's hit the scope function and it's going to execute the function. So let's execute the function. So here it's hit age equals young. But look what it's done within the scope tab. It's actually created a local variable. And at this point, the variable is still undefined. Remember, you need to declare a variable, then it gets initialized, and this is what it's done here. It's initialized it. But it hasn't yet assigned a value. That comes in the next step. When we step down, we stop at our debugger. Now it's assigned a value to the variable, and that is young. Let's continue. Let's go into this if block. I'd expect it to the debugger now to stop at the age again. And that's exactly what it's done. I hope you're starting to feel how cool this is. This is awesome, and you're probably actually understanding this. Very few people do, so well done. So now we've hit this if block. We've got to the next age, which we've defined as old. Again, it's been initialized but not yet assigned a value. Now it's been assigned. Age has the value old. Now when we hit this console log age, we are still within this block. So at this point in time in our code, we have access to the block variable, the local variable, and the global variable. How cool is that? So let's keep going down. When we hit this console log age, it's going to console.log old, I would expect, because we're within this block. So we step over that. Let's head over to our console, and there's old. So it's working. We got our sources tab. Now we're hitting console.log age, but at this point in our code, look what's happened. Our scope block doesn't have a block variable anymore. It only has local and global. And at the moment, we're in the local scope because that's at the top. So our age is defined as young. Yo, this blows my mind. Cool. Let's continue. So let me step over this. I would expect young to have been consoled. And that's exactly what's happened. So I hope this was a nice little bonus for you. I hope this sets you on the path to using the debugger tools to understanding globally, locally, function scoped, and block scoped.